My name is Ellaza, and the night I was married, I thought my life would finally bloom like a flower. Soft and safe in the hands of the man I loved, I was young, hopeful. And I carried dreams that a husband's home would be my shelter, my place of comfort, my world of trust. But dreams, I learned, are often fragile things. And they can shatter in silence long before you even realize it. My husband was not a bad man at first, at least. That's what I wanted to believe. He had charm. He had the smile that could make my heart calm, and for a while, I thought I had chosen well. But there was a shadow over our marriage from the very first day, a shadow that followed me into every room, whispered in every corner, and poisoned every smile. That shadow was my mother-in-law. She did not like me. I could see it in her eyes the very first moment I stepped into that house as a bride. She never shouted or created a scene in front of others. But in silence, her words became knives. She would look at me and then whisper to her son, telling him that I was not good enough, that I was careless, that I was lazy, that I didn't respect their traditions, and slowly, her poison began to work. At first, my husband ignored her small complaints, but as the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, her voice became louder in his mind. One night, he came to me angry, shouting words I had never heard from his mouth before, accusing me of things I had never even done. I stood there, shocked, tears in my eyes, not knowing how the man who once held my hands with tenderness now pushed me away with cruelty. That was the beginning. From then on, every night felt like a test of endurance. He would return from work, listen to his mother's daily report of my supposed mistakes, and then he would punish me. Sometimes it was in words sharp enough to cut my soul. Sometimes it was in silence that froze the air around me. And sometimes it was in actions that made me tremble in the dark. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed one night, holding my chest, crying silently so no one would hear me, because in that house, my tears were not welcome. I asked myself, what did I do wrong? Why am I being treated like this? Why does she hate me so much? I tried to be the perfect wife. I cooked, I cleaned, I obeyed. I smiled even when my heart was breaking, but nothing was enough for her. To her, I was an outsider, a thief who had stolen her son's love. And she wanted to make sure he never gave that love to me again. She succeeded. Slowly, I lost my husband, piece by piece, until the man who once promised me forever became my greatest torment. I wanted to escape. I thought of going back to my parents, but my pride stopped me. How could I tell them that the home they sent me to was nothing but a prison? I stayed, I endured. I hoped that maybe one day he would wake up and see what was happening. But hope can be dangerous. It keeps you chained even when the door is wide open. I stayed for years, believing in a change that never came, until one night, something inside me broke. I realized that if I did not fight back, if I did not stand up for myself, they would destroy me completely. And from that night onward, my pain began to transform into something else. It became fire. It became strength, and it whispered to me every night, Ellaza, you will not remain the victim. You will write the ending of this story yourself with revenge. Every day became a battlefield, though there were no guns or swords, only words, looks, and hands that left invisible scars. My mother-in-law never missed a chance to humiliate me. If I cooked a meal, she said it lacked flavor. The days passed, but inside me, a storm was building. I learned to wear two faces, the submissive wife who obeyed every word and the silent strategist who was carefully writing the script of her revenge. My husband and mother-in-law thought they had broken me, but in truth, they had only awakened something far more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose. I began by listening more than I spoke. At dinner, while they argued about money, I took note of every careless word. My husband often boasted about his illegal dealings, the hidden money he thought no one knew about. He was arrogant, careless, and blinded by his mother's approval. My mother-in-law, on the other hand, had her own greed, jewelry she hid in boxes, money tucked away in secret places. She thought no one noticed, but I noticed everything. I watched their patterns, their habits, their weaknesses. Each detail was like a puzzle piece, and slowly, I was fitting them together into a picture of destruction. At night, when they thought I was asleep, I stayed awake, whispering to myself, patience, Ellaza. Patience is the weapon of the weak that makes them stronger than the powerful. I trained myself not to cry anymore. I trained myself not to react to their insults. The less I reacted, the more careless they became. They grew comfortable, believing I was broken beyond repair. That comfort was the very noose tightening around their necks. Then came an opportunity. One afternoon, I found my husband drunk in the living room, muttering about a deal gone wrong. He cursed loudly, throwing bottles on the floor, and fell asleep on the couch. While he slept, I went through his phone. My hands shook, but my eyes were sharp. I discovered messages, evidence of fraud, lies, even threats he had made to others. It was all there, waiting like dry wood for a spark. I copied everything silently, storing it away where no one could find it. That night, for the first time in years, I felt powerful. My mother-in-law was harder to outsmart. She rarely trusted anyone, not even her own son completely. But greed blinds even the most careful minds. She once asked me to hide an envelope filled with money in the cupboard while she went to answer a phone call. I memorized its weight, its smell, its location. Later, when she had gone out, I replaced it with a similar-looking envelope filled with scraps of paper. She never noticed the switch. That money became my lifeline, my first weapon of independence. As weeks turned into months, I grew bolder. I started meeting people quietly: an old friend from school, a lawyer I trusted, a neighbor who had once seen my bruises but stayed silent. I told them parts of my story. Carefully, not everything, but enough to build allies without drawing suspicion. I was weaving a web, and they were stepping into it unknowingly. The beauty of revenge lies in its patience. If you rush, you destroy yourself. But if you wait, if you strike only when the time is perfect, the impact becomes unforgettable. I was no longer the scared woman who begged for mercy. I was the hunter disguised as prey. Every morning as I served breakfast, I would glance at my husband and his mother, and behind my quiet smile, I would whisper in my heart, "Your time is coming." And then, one night, as I stood by the window looking at the moon, I realized something. Revenge was not only about punishing them. It was about reclaiming myself. They had stolen my peace, my happiness, my dignity. Now I was ready to take it all back. With interest, the stage was being set. And soon, the curtain would rise. The first strike had to be silent. No one should know it was me. I began with my husband. He trusted his phone more than he trusted me, and that was his downfall. I had already copied his data, but now I began sending anonymous messages to the people he had cheated, business partners, men he owed money to, people he had deceived. All received evidence of his lies and corruption. I didn't sign my name. I didn't need to. The truth itself was a bomb, waiting to explode. Within weeks, his phone wouldn't stop ringing. His so-called friends were demanding money, and his business began to collapse. He grew restless, angry, violent. He screamed at me even more. But the more he shouted, the calmer I became. Every slap, every insult, every blow became fuel for my satisfaction, because I knew he was burning from the inside, and I was the fire. Next came my mother-in-law. She was obsessed with her jewelry, her pride, her golden chains and bangles that she polished daily. She never knew that the box she locked in her cupboard had already been tampered with. Slowly, piece by piece, I replaced the real gold with fake ones. At first, just one or two, so she wouldn't notice. Over months, nearly everything in that box was worthless. She still wore them proudly, still boasted to her neighbors about her wealth. But I knew the day she discovered the truth would break her like a glass shattering on the floor. I didn't stop there. I began poisoning their reputation in small, careful doses. When neighbors asked about bruises on my arms, I no longer lied. I told them the truth, softly, with tears in my eyes. "It's nothing," I'd say. "Just an accident at home." But the look in their eyes told me they understood more than I said. Soon, whispers began to spread about my husband's drinking, about his mother's cruelty, about how they treated me. Society, once on their side, began to turn against them. The cracks were visible now. My husband lost one business partner after another. His mother lost her pride as whispers reached her ears. They fought with each other daily, blaming each other for their downfall. I watched silently, cooking their meals, serving them tea, my face calm, but my heart laughing. They had made me their victim, but now I was the invisible hand tearing their world apart. The climax came when my husband's illegal dealings caught up with him. One night, the police came knocking at the door with a warrant. He shouted at me to hide his documents, but I stood frozen, pretending to be afraid. Inside, I was trembling with joy. The evidence I had carefully leaked to the authorities had found its mark. They dragged him out in handcuffs, his eyes wide with shock. He looked at me as if searching for help, but all he saw was my calm, cold gaze. My mother-in-law was left alone, and that was when the second wave hit. One morning, she opened her jewelry box to find only worthless trinkets staring back at her. The scream that tore from her throat was the sweetest music I had ever heard. She accused me, but she had no proof. Her friends laughed at her when she begged for money, when she tried to pawn her fake gold. The woman who had once controlled every breath of my life was reduced to nothing more than a bitter old lady with empty hands. And me? I walked away, not silently this time, but with my head held high. I filed for divorce. I claimed my share of the property. I told the world my story without shame. They thought they had destroyed me, but in truth, they had forged me into steel. When I left that house, I didn't look back. My revenge wasn't in killing them. It was in making them live in the ruins of their own cruelty. My husband rotting In prison, my mother-in-law drowning in humiliation. This was the justice I had built with patience, intelligence, and fire, and as I walked under the open sky, free for the first time, I whispered to myself, never underestimate a woman who has been broken, because she will return not as the same person but as the storm you cannot escape.